Good morning to all the participants and good morning to you, Dr. Matt. I hope you can all hear me. Please kindly indicate with a thumbs up if you can all hear me. To the participants and Dr. Matt, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. And I see all the participants can hear me. Please kindly note that this workshop is being recorded. Welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit here at the Postgraduate School, University of Johannesburg. My name is Lawrence, and I am delighted to be your moderator for today's workshop. I would like to start off by thanking all the participants who have joined us. And we do have participants that will be joining us on the way as well, Dr. Matt, because we had quite a number of registrations, but I just decided we begin as well as this workshop is recorded. So thank you so much to all the participants again for taking your time to join us, and most importantly, our presenter, Dr. Matt, for preparing to giving this presentation, or rather this workshop on budgeting and financial management for research projects. Before introducing Dr. Matt or before reading over his bio, please kindly allow me to read over a few housekeeping rules. If you do have any question during this session, please kindly raise your virtual hand, or you can rather type the question in the chat box and I will indicate it to the presenter to address the question. As I've mentioned that this workshop is being recorded, the presentation slides will be requested from the facilitator and we will post together with the workshop recording on our Moodle communities. I will also be posting a feedback survey in the chat session. Please kindly fill this in as we use this for our reporting purposes and how to improve on the future for this workshop, as well as we also send it to our facilitator for their reporting purposes as well. So also ensure that you fill it in so that you get a certificate of attendance for this particular workshop, as well as to provide some kind words for our facilitator as well. So in that regard, please kindly allow me to read over Dr. Matt's bio, as you can see there on your screen. As it depicted. So Dr. Matthew Vincent obtained his PhD in 2016 at the University of Witwatersrand and is currently a lecturer at the Polio Research Institute at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. His primary research interest is in the earlier Stone Age archaeology of South Africa, focusing on stone tool production, reconstructing landscape using use patterns. He currently co-directs archaeological research project at Vanderboom, Gauteng Province, Amanzi-Springs, Eastern Cape Province, and Swartkop Cave, Gauteng Province. So without any further ado, please kindly allow me to hand over to Dr. Matt to give us this presentation on budgeting and financial management for research projects. Thank you so much, Dr. Matt. You can now proceed. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to fellow colleagues, scholars, and young enthusiastic students who are wading themselves into the beginnings of research projects. This is a nice opportunity to discuss something that is very rarely brought up as a factor in academic studies, which is raising funds and understanding tips and tricks about how budgeting and financial managing of research projects actually works. And just out of some of my own experience, I'm an archaeologist, so I work on a number of archaeological sites across South Africa and have ventured into East Africa as well. And the budgets that are required to carry out these activities, they can be huge, and in some case, millions upon millions of rands to really carry out over several years. Because when we're excavating archaeological sites, it's not a 1 month thing. It typically spans maybe 3 to 10 years to really excavate a project well or a site well to gain enough stone tool or fossil materials or both to then try to reconstruct what is going on at those sites. And so financial management becomes essential to helping that project along and making sure that the research objectives are achieved. And I think that's the kind of crux that we're going to hopefully touch upon today is just how to keep things moving along financially so that you achieve your projects. So my experience in having to do this myself has only really come recently. I've been in archaeology for probably the last 20 years now as a student and a fairly young professional. But at no point in time was there any sort of information given to me about how to gain funds and how to construct projects around funding and how to then manage those funds well so that we have enough money to do the things that we have said we are going to do in grant budgets and grant proposals well. And I think that becomes the first real step into the professional world, is understanding how to gain and how to spend money well and carry out the goals that you wish to achieve. So I hope that that's something that becomes more clear. I also have the chat function on, and I would encourage people to ask questions as I'm going along. I know this is more of a workshop style. So I was told that I could just kind of create a bit of an outline here and speak to that outline. If anybody has any specific questions that might help them, they're very welcome. We can treat this more as a round table. I find that those types of structures help well to guide people's interest and also to address questions on the spot when they come up. If somebody has a question, please do ask, because it's probably, you'll find that a number of other people will be thinking along the same lines. So without further ado, let us get into the topics here. And I think, from my perspective, what I'm talking about here is managing a research team, managing a research project. I know many students out there will not be at that level yet. If you're conducting PhD research or master's research, or even postdoctoral research, you might be a single individual trying to accomplish things. But I think a lot of the lessons and a lot of the topics discussed here are very transferable. So there may be aspects here where I'm talking about team management, but it's easy to take those lessons and transfer them onto a single person trying to achieve outcomes. So I hope that does filter down. And again, if anybody has any questions, then please just jump in here. I think for me, budgeting and financial management is so deeply entangled in constructing a very good research project. There's no way to really separate these things. So I am going to consistently refer back to good conceptualization and execution of a research project, and that will create a scaffolding for me to really talk about budgeting and financial management. So I'm going to start actually here with talking just a very brief overview of the way that I conceive good research. Without good research, you cannot have a budget in place. You cannot have ideas about funding in place, and you cannot then, after sequestering funding, manage those funds very well. So I just want to touch upon that as maybe a little bit of a background. In my experience, when I am sitting down and constructing a research project, there's really three phases of it that I find useful to sort of separate and start to tease apart so that I can create a bit of an outline for how those three parts might be structured. And the first part for me is really a conceptual phase, followed by a formational phase, followed by the execution. And I'll talk specifically about these three parts in general, but those are the specific phases that I think are very important for understanding how to construct a budget. So I'm going to be consistently referring back to a specific archaeological project that I am currently managing and budgeting for, which is funded by the NRF, and this is the Wonderboom project. Wonderboom is a small, shallow valley that's sitting in Pretoria, And right outside of the city, there's this beautiful nature reserve. Within that nature reserve, there is an archaeological site that was discovered in the 1950s. It has laid dormant for many years. Myself and a couple of other colleagues have gone back to excavate that site. And we're trying to recover stone tools. We're trying to find ways to create a dating regime that will give us a chronology for the site as well. And those are the things that we need to make this site significant in terms of science and archaeological science. So I'm going to use that as a bit of a background and just discuss very briefly about how I sort of conceptualized that project and how that led me to the budget and how that leads me now into understanding how to manage the finances of that project. By this point in time, I'm sure everybody understands at least the basics of how to conceptualize a research project. This is the conceptual phase. And if you have sat with supervisors or sat with colleagues, the first thing that becomes clear is having very clear and well-defined and achievable goals. A lot of the times when students come into the academic world, they have all kinds of great ideas, but trying to make those ideas practical becomes, your engagement with your supervisor. Hopefully, that you should walk away with some sort of project that has clear, defined, achievable goals. But a lot of the times those dynamics are not really well laid out to students. And so, when you're coming up with a concept, you're attaching some sort of theory to what is observable in the world, whether that be people, whether that be stone tools or animals or what have you. But we also have to think about the practicalities. And this is where a lot of research projects in the conceptual phase really start to derail, is not understanding what kind of practical limits might you face when you're trying to achieve a research goal. But it's incredibly important. So for instance, in the Wonderboom project, I have this deposit, this archaeological deposit, but stone tools don't magically appear. I have to dig to get those stone tools out. If I want to create a chronology or to date the sites, to get sort of radiometric ages out of a site to understand where it fits in time, I have to understand what methods might be applicable, what laboratories might be available to do those types of analyses, and who might be able to lead that research. The conceptual phase then boils down to myself having a fantastic idea. I want to go to Wonderboom. I want to excavate the site. I want to date the site. But what are the practicalities behind that? And again, this may seem a bit more theoretical now, but it will start to filter down into budgeting and managing finances. So the first thing that I want to do is think about objectives. I have a research problem. Wonderboom is undated, and the archaeology of that site, the stone tools, the technology, how they were produced are not very well understood. So that's where I come in, the archaeologist, to try to start to think about ways to answer those particular questions. But I'm set out with some very real world problems. I have to have some sense of labor. I can't be the only person out there doing this job. So that means I need to construct a team. I also cannot do the dating analysis myself. So I have to get the right people on board. Finding specialists and finding people to help is very important. And if I were to look at this from maybe a PhD perspective or a postdoctoral perspective, then it's really about choosing the right supervisor for your work, right? Who's going to help you and nurture you along the way. So there I want to start thinking very carefully about the types of personalities, the people that I'm going to get involved in my project, and what can they do. So I might just start thinking about that, and I might start thinking about, okay, the amount of time that I'm going to need to reasonably achieve my goals. Let's say I have a team of about 5 people. Then I'm starting to already think about, okay, budgeting, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But who's that team going to be comprised of? I'm going to have dating specialists. I'm going to have archaeological specialists, and I'm going to have students on board to help me with this project. And all of that equals money at the end of the day. Um, so when I'm going through, I'm trying to think about very clear goals. I want to think about the people that I might want to bring in, or how I'm going to achieve those goals in a practical sense. Archaeological sites require stuff. They require trowels. They require sort of dustpans, brushes, toothbrushes, nails, hammers, all kinds of equipment. And I want to think about assembling, a sort of list of equipment that's going to fit the team and what their goals need. If I'm thinking about dating, I might start to consult people and start to say, hey, here's our deposit, here's the nature of it. Can you effect this type of dating? For instance, my good friend and colleague, Teboho Makubela, who works in the geology department, was going to come out and he was going to do some dating called cosmogenic nuclide burial dating. Now, I won't go into the specifics of that. It's a mouthful and takes a background in chemistry to really understand. But what I can do is start to have a very practical conversation with Teboho about, if he were to come on board with a project like this, is thinking about what kinds of costs that would incur. Now, he runs a lab where he can do part of this analysis, and then he has team members that he works with in Germany and other places abroad to carry out some of the more fine resolution analyses that will actually produce a date. So those are the things that I have to start thinking about right from the outset. If I want to bring Teboho on board, who is an expert, it's going to incur an extra cost of dealing with laboratories in Germany. And this is all, again, you can probably start to see now, is going to start to filter down and is going to start to create a bit of a cost incursion that I need to factor for. So in this conceptual phase, it's very important to start thinking about and start to understand what types of costs are starting to be incurred just by even something as simple as creating a research question, creating a sort of map about practicalities. How am I going to answer those research questions? And who might I along the way want to bring on board to help me along with answering those questions or carrying out specific parts of research? All has cost incursions, and to be very aware of that from the beginning. I want to bring the best people on board, but if the best people are abroad and it's going to incur costs of flights and accommodation and food that might be outside of a small budget, then the reality is I have to start looking more local, and I have to start maybe finding who's the next best in line, or more practically, who's available around me in the surrounding area. And this is the question that I was forced to ask when I put in my budget and funding proposal for Wonderboom, which is funded by the NRF, by the way. I had to answer those questions because I knew that the amount of money that I was going to be able to sequester is probably under R1,000,000. And in fact, I only got about 600,000 Rand from the NRF. Now, to students, that sounds like, oh, hooray, that's a huge budget. But when you start to move up the scales in the professional world of academia, you'll understand that 600,000 Rand spread over a 3 to 5 to 6 year period then starts to become small chunks of money that you can deal with on a yearly basis. But we'll talk a little bit about how sometimes you can play around with cost when you're budgeting for a research project. Maybe you don't have to spend large chunks of money in the first part of your project or in the last part of your project. And I'll tell you a little bit how I structured that at Wonderboom. So in any case, again, emphasizing that concepts and practicalities of running and structuring a research project all incur costs. The more you are realistic with yourself about those costs and about how you can then use money to push things forward is very important and not very well discussed. I honestly think it would pay very well to create courses like this, which talk about the practicalities and realities of these issues. So that's kind of the conceptual phase, I would say. Then moving into a formational phase is really when you start to solidify relationships. And this is where you start to really think about where are the finances going to come from. At the student level, hopefully your supervisor will have very good ideas about where you can get money from. They may have money as well if you are coming into a part of a funded research project, which is fantastic. There may be budgets that are already set out and allowed. But I would encourage students, even right through to the sort of early phases of a postdoc, to engage with people who are running these projects, and maybe ask small questions about how money is gathered, how money is spent. These lessons can become very important for when you are ready to take that leap. Maybe you're coming onto a research project, or you want to go for a small funding budget to create research. It's really, I think, important for students to walk away from projects with as much knowledge as possible. And sometimes we find ourselves limiting our, to maybe the academic or the research portion of it. But if you are serious about academia, it really pays to engage with people who are running research projects and ask them about the practical aspects, about the nitty gritties. If you're sitting down and having lunch one day on a research project and there's really not much to talk about, do yourself a favor and just start asking questions with those regards, because the tips, tricks, and hints that may come out of how somebody is able to sequester funds and how they're able to use it best. A simple question like, where do you think your funding is used best in answering the research questions you're trying to tackle, can maybe help to build a little bit of a working knowledge before you have to wade into this very often daunting and scary exercise of garnering funding. It's not easy, and sometimes can be very debilitating from um, having the enthusiasm of running a research project, but then trying to gain funds for a research project. How to write an effective research grant becomes a whole other animal. It's really taken me out of my academic space to learning how to sell myself and how to sell a project. But funding grants will never be successful until you have those skills. And as academics, we're always maybe hopefully taught to be a little bit more humble, but here is where you have to really take lessons from business, from the business world, and learning how to sell something and make it seem like it's going to be an incredibly important part of human knowledge at some point in time. And you're obviously speaking to funding bodies that will be interested in your research, but your contention with maybe tens to hundreds of other applications in some respects, you have to make yourself stand out. And so, going back to the conceptualization phase, having very clear, defined problems, research goals, having the right team members on board, all add to that. And the more money you're able to take away from a funder, obviously, the better off that you are. So these things all start to interrelate, having very clear, defined, achievable goals, having the right people on board, having a time limit set up, and also having a very well constructed budget is important. I also would like to just touch upon here, when people are thinking about creating budgets, when they're trying to sequester funds from research bodies, it really does help to, I think, ask for more rather than less. Many researchers find themselves in a conundrum when they want funding to try to ask for the least amount of money possible. And that is one strategy. But in my feedback from many funding agencies, I've often found that a huge criticism that I have experienced is that the funding agency starts to maybe question whether the project goals are achievable with the budget that I'm asking. And so where you can get away with 100,000 Rand, ask for 150, don't go a million. And I think it's an important piece of advice that if you have a well-constructed budget that has ample funds to help you along the way, those are the projects that are more likely to be funded. And no one's really shown me that or told me about that. That's just out of experience. And then talking to some of my more senior colleagues who have said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. That's that's a good strategy as well." So I think it's just worth it to put it out there. When I was going through my NRF application, I found that there was, again, more of on a conceptual level, way to start thinking about and structuring a budget is very important. So here we're at a phase in the formational phase still. We don't have a budget, but we're trying to apply for one. And this I think is a very important point, which if I would have talked to my past self, would have given that guy a lot of advice about how to construct a budget. Because a lot of the times with funding agencies, the budget becomes a very set thing. And so it really does pay to think about and conceptualize a meaningful budget and how you were going to spend money in a very, very detailed and careful manner. And the reason why is that if I was going to put forth a massive budget for tools that I need to excavate at Wonderboom, and I'm talking about trowels, dustpans, hammers, nails, all the practical stuff that I need to securely remove sediment from this archaeological deposit and recover stone tools well. Maybe it becomes clear down the road that I have a lot of money set up with the practical stuff, all the tools that I need, but there's some other form of analysis that maybe Toboho, my dating specialist, is now needing me to require. And this is something that wasn't known, but I want to now take money out of one area of my budget and move it into another. Sometimes that can be very difficult, and sometimes it requires motivation, and that motivation has to then go to some sort of council that has to be discussed, and it can create problems down the way. So here is where we want to really prepare well. I can't emphasize enough that preparation is so important to securing and as well as spending money in a research project. We haven't even got to that to that topic, but I'm really trying to emphasize here that the more we think about before the money is even gotten, how to spend that money effectively, we will help our future selves down the road to achieving our goals well with a very well constructed budget, a budget that can be a little bit flexible, but we want to start thinking about padding areas of our budget that are going to be the sort of areas of big costs, what I would call sort of constant cost or fixed costs. So anyways, when we are constructing a budget, we want to start to then think about the practicalities. Going back to the conceptual phase, what did we talk about the practicalities will be in answering a research question or setting up a research project? What needs to be done? And here is where we want to be very meticulous. We want to break down the practicalities of how to carry our research, if even possible, on a month-to-month basis. Maybe not day to day. That's a little bit too much, but we want to think about what is going to be involved. So going back to Wonderboom, I live in Johannesburg. UJ is based in Johannesburg, as we all know. My site's in Pretoria. So right then there, we're going to start thinking about the practicalities of incurred costs. I need a vehicle and I need fuel to run that vehicle. I need food to feed people. I need water, and I need somewhere to set up some sense of a base camp. All of our stuff is going to be somewhere that is going to help us facilitate our excavations. So that's a very practical, real world thing that needs to be done. It's not difficult to start thinking about those costs, but I want to be very realistic. And so the process that I went through in creating the budget for Wonderboom is I went onto Google Earth and I calculated the number of kilometers. And then I even went as far as to look at fuel costs over the last 3 months. And all this information is very available online. Then I took an average of the fuel costs and multiplied that by the number of kilometers that I'm driving back and forth. In the conceptual phase, I was thinking about, okay, well, I am going to get these people together. How long are we going to be out there? What is a reasonable amount of time? Now, because I've worked on archaeological sites for a lot, in my career over the past 20 years, I know that I'm not going to get people out for 2 or 3 months, but a month's worth of dedicated time is reasonable. And I know that people's schedules would be probably amenable to a month. 2 weeks was too short. We're not going to dig enough or dig deep enough to justify a budget. So we needed a large chunk of time. So here again, I'm taking information from my conceptual phase and thinking about something simple. How long can I get people out at the site to actually do stuff, to excavate the site? A month is probably a good amount of time. It's very standard in archaeology to do that. And I'm sure other disciplines, if you are doing field work like in anthropology or biological sciences, there will be some sort of set standard. I know for a fact that plant biologists will do field work over 3 months. And how people then maintain their lives and families and research, I don't know, but that is a standard allotted amount of time to be out in the field. So these are the types of nitty-gritties we really want to get into. Okay, so I'm out at Wonderboom for a month. Am I going to drive back and forth every day? I live in Johannesburg. Pretoria is an hour away. The site is about an hour and 15 minutes away. So it's achievable to do that. And that's what we ended up deciding to do. I might need accommodation. If I need accommodation, what is the proximity to the site? How expensive is accommodation within the area that I am? Is it a safe area to stay in? If I'm taking students and things like this, safety concerns obviously come into factor. So I might pay a little bit more for accommodation and fuel because I want to find a place that's appropriate. Thinking about storage, where is all of our equipment going to be stored on the day-to-day basis? From there, I can start, once I have those questions answered, I can start to construct a budget. I will at least know vehicle hire costs, I will know fuel costs, and I will have some gauge of where accommodation can be set. Just so everybody knows, UJ has some strict requirements for accommodation if you're thinking about that part of the budget. So it's always good to just check in with the university administrator to see what kinds of constraints you might have on costs. Luckily for us in our small research unit, we have access to a field vehicle. So I don't need to worry about hiring a vehicle, but there is a set amount for fuel. And those are the details that I came to learn in my first year, which I wish I would have known and I should have done before I submitted my budget proposal, because I was very light on fuel in my NRF application. And we'll talk about those practicalities in a second here. So it's these little practical things that really need to be sorted out first that will help you develop a budget. When I'm thinking about putting together a budget, the way that I conceptualize it is costs that I know are going to be standard from year to year. NRF runs it typically in a 3 to 4 year budgeting system before you have to reapply. So the funding instrument within the NRF for me was called African Origins Platform. It's a 3-year platform. I can ask up to, I think, 2.5 million Rand, and I have 3 years to spend that money. When we talk about budgets and NRF specifically, which is probably a very common funding instrument across UJ and other South African institutes, budgets are money that you ask for that you have to spend. Otherwise, that money doesn't come back. Specifically the NRF, you can ask for an extension or a rollover for parts of your budget, but those rollover justifications have to be very well structured. And those are kinds of things that you want to avoid, actually. If you are asking and proposing for a budget, you want to make sure that money is spent throughout the year. That's also good for promoting yourself within the university. The departments love it when you have a set budget and you're able to spend every single rand out of that budget. So again, just a little piece of insider knowledge there. But the way that I sort of think about it is I borrow some terms from economics, fixed cost and variable costs, but I don't take the literal meanings of them. Fixed cost would be like a cost that doesn't vary in price. Fixed cost for me means things that I know I'm going to need to buy year in, year out throughout my project running along. So fuel, food, accommodation, and potentially some sort of storage hire to store stuff. Those are my fixed costs. I know every single year I'm going to need those same things, and so I'm going to have to budget appropriately for them. Within those costs, I might even think about, okay, well, I know that there's massive inflation. Do I need to adjust for inflation when I'm thinking about year to year? Food, obviously, right now has dramatically risen. So what might cost me 10,000 Rand to budget 1 year's worth of food might be 11 or 12 in the next. And those are things that I want to try to keep track of. Accommodation costs may have some variation in them. Storage costs tend to be fairly stable. So these are all things that I really want to think about. And the way that I gain this knowledge is to sit down and Google everything, even working a little bit with AI, as well as asking other colleagues, how do they budget and how do they maintain finances as we go along. So these are all things that really, really help when it actually comes to spending money. And again, as you notice, I'm talking mostly here about conceptual phases because pre-planning and understanding where your limitations are going to be can really, really help solve a lot of issues. It is the most important part about budgeting for any research project. So I've put together my budget here, and I've understood that, okay, I have certain costs that I'm going to spend year to year, but I have also costs that may vary, where I might need something 1 year, but not in the next. And this is where good communication and good talking with the people that you're involved with is really going to help. I would never sit down in a research project and try to think these things through just on my own. If you're a student, you talk with your supervisor. Your supervisor might chat with some colleagues, or they may chat with administration to figure out how things work. If you are running a research project as an early career researcher, then you want to bring together your team members, who you have carefully and meticulously hand chosen and invited onto the project. They will be specialists. And so you'll ask them, how much does it cost to get dates out of the Wonderbloem project, which is exactly what I sat down and asked my colleague Teboho, and he ran me through the whole process. And there was cost for processing samples in his laboratory of sediments and rocks that we were going to date. And then there was the sort of shipping those samples to Germany, which then they ran to get or to process the actual dates and deal with statistical data to create dates for us that said, okay, Wonderbloem is a deposit now that is around 600,000 years old. And so there were a number of different costs that were incurred just by using Teboho. Again, as I said, he was working with his lab in Germany. All that was set, all that was known, that comes into my budget. Now I need to think, do I only need that particular portion of work to be done in year one? If that is true, then in my budgeting, I want to think about, okay, what's year 2 and 3 going to actually focus on? My project is multifaceted, and so I was able to say, okay, we're going to pad my budget very high in year 1. Then in years 2 and 3, the funding will taper off slightly because I don't need dating work done. So there's no processing of samples, there's no Teboho, there's no sending samples or involvement with German labs. That was all done in year 1. And again, those types of structures, they really help with convincing a funding agency that you really know what you're talking about and you've really thought things through. Again, preparation being key here. So I have, varying costs, things that are going to maybe I'll need here and there, but not throughout the whole project. And I have developed now a pretty thorough budget with understanding what are the things I'm going to need consistently and what are the things that I'm going to only need sporadically throughout my research project. So I was awarded all the money from the NRF because I didn't ask for an overinflated or a huge budget. So it's about 600 or 700,000 rands that I was awarded over a 3-year period. And now that project came to life, because of the funding, all of those budgets were set, and now we are kind of more set in stone as to how we can spend money. And this is, again, something that you really want to think about. Where do you need to direct your efforts because of your financial structure and those limitations? I can't take all of the funding in year 1 for dating and move it to year 3 now because the NRF is going to come back and say, oh, hold on, wait a minute, in your budget and in your research plan, this is how you laid everything out. So we're actually not going to give you money in year 3 that's heavily padded. You've told us you wanted in year 1, and this is where you have to now make things happen. So again, referring back to the conceptualization process, making sure that you have all of these practicalities really worked out, good communication with your team members. I'm talking to Toboho on a weekly basis and saying, hey, we got this money. Let me know your schedule. Here's what needs to be done. Let's set out some protocols that are going to help us achieve that. And then you give me an idea of when the timing of things is actually going to happen. So we have all that out. We have the money in our account now, and now it's time to really start spending it. And the first thing that I think came to light for me when I received my first NRF grant to carry out the Wonderboom research project is starting to understand the limitations of your institution and the funding body. UJ, they are very structured in the way that they allocate money, and understanding the timing of things when and how you are spending money. So typically, at least in the humanities and anthropology, cost for buying things has to go through a requisitions process. They want it done through their UJ buying system, in which case you will maybe send an administrator a list of things and saying, okay, I have a budget here. In my grant proposal, I have asked for these things, and now I want to purchase these things. Everything that is purchased through UJ, whether you have the grant conditions and all of that laid out, has to be motivated for. It's not a big deal to write a quick motivation, just a paragraph on why things need to be spent in a certain way. But we have a business partner system in which the business partner needs to approve, has a bit of oversight in how money is spent. And this is worldwide. It's not just UJ trying to micromanage how budgets are spent. And my first reaction, unfortunately, was, well, hold on, why do I need to do this? I'm the one that got the money. I brought the money into UJ. I should be able to spend it how I want. I had worked with a colleague from Australia. He has a big grant that he got to do an archaeological project that I was fortunate enough to be a part of. And his university just gives him a credit card. He has a grant from the Australian Research Council, which is a government system that's much like the NRF. That money goes into a bank account that's controlled by the university. The university gives him a credit card, and he just goes all day long, tapping and swiping. It's beautiful. It works really well. Unfortunately, we don't have that system at UJ for various reasons, which are above my pay grade in terms of why and all of that. But we have a very much more structured system in how we can ask for and spend money. And these are the types of challenges that you have to be aware of when you are budgeting for a research project. So I'll give you an example. At Wonderboom, I bring on student volunteers, I bring on my students, and I bring out specialists. And part of the incentive to get student volunteers to come out specifically is that I will give you training in the practicalities of excavating an archaeological site. Unfortunately, those skills are not very well taught in South Africa at the moment. There is very little opportunity for students to get fieldwork experience, even though fieldwork and actually going out and excavating and digging archaeological sites for fossils and stone tools is the bread and butter of our discipline. There are not a lot of universities that actually take the time to integrate students for long periods of time so they learn the processes very well. Usually field schools will run for a week, 2 weeks, and it's not very practical to train students in how to actually excavate very well in different techniques and the different types of machines and technologies we use. So that's part of the draw. That's part of the incentive. Myself and my colleagues, we have been doing research in the field for a combined, 60 odd years. We have different skills that we will come and we will train you in. And when you walk away, you will be slightly more educated in how to excavate archaeological deposits. When you then join other research projects, boom, you have skills that you can run with. I need to feed these people. And that's going back to the sort of practical concerns in the conceptualization phase. I need food, I need water. I budgeted for that in my NRF application and said that I'm probably going to need between 10 and 11,000 Rand to feed people comfortably for that month period if I have, let's say, 5 to 6 student volunteers that are joining me. And so then came down to figuring out with my administrator, who has the patience of a saint, because I was constantly knocking on her door, thinking, asking her questions. Okay, how can I buy this? How can I buy that? Anyways, long story short, her first initial thought was that, well, we can use UJ requisitions to buy food from UJ. At the Bunting Road campus, they have the STH, which is kind of like a school for hospitality, and they have a kitchen where they teach, cooking skills and that type of stuff, hosting and hospitality, and we can buy food for them. That's not practical. So I've already budgeted for my fuel in my research, and that was from my house to Wonderboom, picking up people along the way, but it wasn't going to UJ, and that's incurring another cost that I have to go be there in the morning to pick up food. If it's not on time, I'm late to site. You can see that things would start to back up. I want the freedom to be able to spend my own money in my own way. So we decided that the best thing to do was for me to actually front the money. And I have that privilege because I'm employed with UJ. So I can take a little bit of my monthly savings and I can put together a little kitty that will then be reimbursed to me. And that was fine. I was able to do that. The business partner approved, but the money coming back and trying to get the money back into my account was a little bit delayed. And so those are things that I did not think about. It's always best, and I will say this, it's always best to try to pay for things beforehand, to try to have things flow directly from your UJ cost center into requisitions, that then you don't have to interfere, or you can let those processes carry out. The other way to try to get money from my UJ cost center is to do not a reimbursement, but to get the money beforehand, to be paid a month, 2 months beforehand, and then have that money come out of my cost center. It's a much, much, much better way to do it. And UJ, you can, if the business partner agrees, you can have them front you money in an amount when they see it's on your grant and written in. So that's the much better way to do it. And this is the system that I use now. So I put in motivations, I have my grants application, and I say, here, this is the budget that I have allotted in this year. Can you please give me money for the month of July while I'm excavating? And that has worked out fairly well. But again, these are the types of things that one has to often deal with when you're setting up a good research project. So it became very clear that my job as the PI in this project is actually just budgeting, financing, and managing personalities to make sure that research is being facilitated. So understanding the cost of things, being very precise can help you, but sometimes there are situations that come up, right? We can't always predict exactly how many number of hammers that we may need or nails that we may need. Maybe the cost of shipping samples for dating has slightly inflated. And here's where we want to have very good communication with grant agencies and our team members. And this has happened over the years at Wonderboom. Sometimes costs have come up that I haven't predicted. And so we want to be very well in touch at the University of Johannesburg, like at other South African universities. We have representatives that speak to the NRF on our behalf. And as students, you can very well take advantage of this with permission from your supervisor to create connections with, people that might facilitate these conversations. Particularly with the NRF, again, we have representatives that work for the University of Johannesburg who facilitates these types of conversations. And so as long as we have very well motivated interests, we can actually take part of our budget and move it to somewhere else. Now, again, it's not the greatest thing in the world, because sometimes that conversation can happen over maybe a month period. And if you need money now, then you're going to find yourself stuck. And so it is possible. It's not ideal, but it is possible to move costs from somewhere in your budget to another part of your research project to help that part of a research project along. So these things are doable. But again, it takes some conversation and convincing. Motivations have to be written. If you're working in a research project and you're working with, funding through the University of Johannesburg, you're going to get used to writing large amounts of motivations. And in fact, I just have templates now. If it's a food motivation, I have a template and I just insert the date and, maybe expand a little upon the needs and the understanding, so on and so forth. And then I have my motivation ready to go. And so, those begin, I think, are covering the major aspects of at least securing money through very good planning, conceptualizing a budget very well as trying to spend that money well. One thing I will say too is just very good communication within a team and understanding where people are in their process that are contributing towards a research project, and holding people accountable becomes really important for spending a budget. So again, the backdrop of having an NRF grant with the University of Johannesburg is the deanery is monitoring how money is being spent from colleagues that have, NRF budgets. And if I only spend half of my NRF budget, I may incur the the curiosity of the deanery and asking me, well, you've asked for this much money, you haven't spent that much money. What's going on here? Understanding that, my spending of an NRF budget also reflects upon my higher ups, the people above me. They're patting me on the back saying, good job, you got the NRF. That's great. And you have a budget now, but understanding how to spend that money to its fullest and to its maximum becomes very, very important. And it's very good to walk into a funding situation knowing that. The money that is spent does reflect upon the budgeting sheets of my superiors, and they are also I think very interested in how money is spent and how much money is spent. So just something to also keep in mind. Getting back to managing the research team is holding people accountable and understanding how and how much money that they require and how they are going to spend it. creating a timeline with people, and creating a sort of accountability process, or a sort of check-in or checkup becomes important. And those things may seem disconnected, but they are not. If Toboho is telling me he's taking samples in July, he'll have processed samples in August, ready to be shipped out in September. I want to make sure that he is held accountable for his research process, that he takes those samples, he prepares them. He has that done by X date, or within, maybe a month's range, because what's going to happen is I'm going to then have to communicate with my administrator, who's going to help me then say, okay, this work has been done. We need to give the X amount of money to Boho Makubela or his lab, or to whoever I am working with. That is going to then, reflect on my budget sheets. And I want to make sure that we're somewhere within the set costs that we have agreed upon, and making sure that that process is ticking along. One of the other things that is very rarely discussed is that if you're awarded money in January, most of that budget has to be spent by October. We and our financial system at UJ closes down for the year, and they do it sort of earlier in the year, because they have to then start preparing for their tax reports, and for reporting university income versus spending and things like this. They have their own processes, and we have to fit within those processes. So that came as a big shock in year one to me, that I had over half my budget and it was August. And so to try to then motivate for requisitions, which can take a while, can sometimes take up to a month, maybe longer, for requisitions and UJ buyers to actually come back with quotes and facilitate that process. I often found that I had to get involved sometimes with those processes to try to push that system along. So keeping those deadlines in mind, that after October, really at the end of September, I would even say, the UJ financial system begins to become more and more dormant, and they begin to focus on their reporting rather than spending money. And so to try to spend money in the latter half of the year, October, November, December, it's a no-go, because the university obviously shuts down. Those are the types of deadlines that one has to meet. And that is also incredibly important for understanding how to structure a research project, even at the student level, master's, PhD, is to make sure that you have good tabs on things. Your supervisor will probably be very well aware of everything has to be done by October. If it's your last year, you're even having to submit by October. So all the costs incurred have to be paid for by that timing. And if you can manage these things well, if you can, right from the conceptual stage, understand the flow of research, setting up a good research project will help inform the budget. If the budget is very well structured, you're going to have less problems when it comes to the execution. When I set out at Wonderboom, year one, it was a bit of a leap, because I had never really run a research project on my own, by myself, garnered the funding, all of that. But we all have to jump into that pool of water at some point in time and learn how to swim. There's many lessons that I learned, mistakes that I learned from. And these are just some tips and tricks, I think, that might help, young researchers getting into the field, manage and budget for research projects. So I think that's a bit of a broad overview. I would like to open up the floor to questions, if anybody has questions, so that we can maybe get into more of a discussion, which I'm happy to answer questions and give my opinions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matt, for the very insightful presentation, and for a very well-rounded presentation on budgeting and financial management for Richard's project. Really appreciate your insights there. There is a question in the chat box. It says, thank you for a great presentation. I was involved recently with an NRF Tutuka post-PhD track grant application. I have to say the budgeting process was a challenge given the cost restrictions for the grant.
Yeah. And it's often the case. We as researchers want to answer big, broad questions. We have blue sky ideas, as I call them. We want a lot of money, sometimes to be able to answer those questions, but we are then often restricted. It's very, very rare that the NRF in specific will award a full grant, a full budget. Often what happens is they come back and say, this research project is great, but we only have so many funds available because a lot of people, particularly at the postgraduate level, there's such fierce competition for research funding that you may ask for R1 million and you get 500,000. And everything then has to start being scaled back. It is such a common issue all throughout South African universities. And I've spoken to people who on very rare occasion have gotten the full grant. 90% of people have gotten a very small portion or maybe up to half of what they have actually asked for. My grant was fully funded because I was running things on a shoestring budget. I had planned for that. The reason that I did that specifically is because at the time I was applying, I had a fairly good publication record, but I knew that I was not in the system. No one had funded me really outside of for PhD research, and that was mostly through my supervisor, so I didn't have the track record. So I asked for a smaller budget, knew how to cut cost and where and all of that, and I was successful in that. But it still is to this day, I think to myself, what could I have done with R1 million? So PhD grants, they are typically, run on a constrained budget, and then you're only getting a portion of what the NRF has maybe granted you. And this comes down now to going back to that conceptualization phase, to understanding the research questions and the practicalities based upon the budget. One informs the other always. The amount of money I have versus what I want to do. Then in the middle is this space called practically what can I do? and that becomes the challenge is how do I make the practicalities come to life and worthy of the PhD project, right? It comes down then to scaling down, having to find maybe different ways to answer that question you were set out to want to answer, or to maybe try to shift conceptually the project in such a way that it's more realistic to the budget that you have. And these are the practicalities that you're going to find moving up through the system. It doesn't get any easier. It doesn't get any better. Oftentimes, when we are competing on an international level for grants or a national level, it becomes even worse. Just as but to round the diatribe that I'm off on now, I have applied for 2 international grants 6 years in a row, and only was funded this last 6 years because of budgetary constraints. And it wasn't the full amount that I was asking for. It's actually kind of peanuts in a sense. So I feel your pain. I really do. But these are the practicalities of academic research.
Thank you so much, Doc, for clarifying on that question. There is another question in the chat which says, what are some of the key components to include on the research budget, and what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid for a research project?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a bit of a broad one, but I will try to maybe provide some examples. So again, when we go to the conceptualization phase, we should have some list of practicalities. You really want to make sure that the basics are taken care of, and I would say those are the things that have the key components of a budget. So those kinds of practicalities might be. I'm going to have 5 people at Wonderboom, food, water, fuel. Those are the things that need to be covered as the basics to actually carry out the research project. What kind of specialist analyses do I need to run that are vital to my research project? Those are the things that I really want to pad quite large for. If I can get away with cutting costs for food, water, fuel, I will. We don't need to shop at Woolies. We can, maybe get away with just basic sandwiches and some water. And that's what we're going to have for lunch every day or whatever it is. It might not be luxurious, but those are ways I can cut costs. I think, some of the pitfalls that you might want to avoid would be things like inflating budgets. If I know that bread and milk, or sorry, bread and cheese and, maybe some sort of condiment, mayo or mustard is going to cost me at a daily basis, let's say 10 Rand per person, just out of ballpark. I don't want to then ask for 50. The pitfalls to avoid, I think, are understanding that your funding bodies are going to have a very, very well-developed idea of how much things actually cost. There's are running spreadsheets that funding agencies keep, that will let them know what kind of basic fuel prices will be, what prices for accommodation we'll ask for. If I'm asking 10,000 Rand for accommodation over a week's period, they might find that considerable. If I'm asking 10,000 Rand for accommodation for 3 days, they will not find that considerable. So it's just getting to know the cost of things and doing a little bit of market research, taking that week that it's going to take to search Google relentlessly to try to find costs of things and how they might fluctuate over time. I think that becomes the big pitfall to avoid, is understanding that something like petrol, is going to fluctuate. Inflation is rather high around the world. There is a war in Ukraine that is disrupting supplies of fuel around to the world. Those are the types of things that will cause fuel to rise. And, I even found it helpful to just do a little bit of market research out there and say, what are people predicting in terms of fuel prices? Do we think it's going to come down? Do we think it's going to stay level? Do we think it's going to go up? One in doubt, always err on the side of inflated costs rather than deflated costs, only because then you pad yourself a little bit. If within reason, of course. If I know fuel might be going up a few rands here or there, then instead of asking for 10,000, I might want to ask for 11.5 thousand. Those types of things I think are very important to work out to avoid underfunding yourself in something that you're then going to have to consistently justify for every single year, and that becomes a bit of a painful process. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doc, for clarifying on those questions and for answering them very extensively. Really appreciate your insights there. There is another question. It says UJ does have an internal review processes for.
Yes.
So does UJ have an internal review processes for the NRF application to aid researchers in ensuring that the application have a chance of being granted?
Yes, absolutely they do. And in fact, it's an inbuilt part of the NRF system. You don't have any choice. Your application is going to go to the NRF officers for review, whether you like it or not. And I have to say that I think it's a very good thing. I have always found the NRF reviewers at UJ to be very helpful and to be very, very practical in the way that they have given advice. Surrounding the budget, they provided some very, very good structural advice. I think that's where the NRF officers really come into play, where they can help you understand that maybe some sort of cost is too inflated or not so inflated. I am an archaeologist, and obviously the NRF reviewers don't have a background in archaeology, so they try to make as helpful points as possible in helping me with the conceptual side of my project. Maybe some of that research or that advice is useful, maybe sometimes not so useful, not their fault at all. I have found them to be very responsive and very thorough, and provide advice with the budgeting and specific has helped me think about things, because what the NRF officer maybe can't do for you conceptually because they're not, involved in your field, what they will be able to do is tell you, well, the NRF will like this, won't like that. And that becomes the real usefulness of the review process with UJ. So when you go on to NRF Connect and you fill out the grant application, you'll press submit at the end of it after all the bits and pieces and are loaded up and the application is complete. That will go directly to UJ. The internal deadlines that are constantly posted to UJ researchers and academic and administrative staff are actually for UJ to review the applications that they've received for a particular grant call before they're sent off to the NRF. They're not NRF internal deadlines. That's a later date. So for instance, the AOP call usually comes out February to January to February sometime. Our applications are due by June to be reviewed over June, July, and in September is when the NRF then takes those applications. So those 2 months in between June to July is when the NRF or when the NRF officers at UJ are specifically reviewing applications. So you don't have to do that process on your own. It's all integrated. It's all automatic through the NRF Connect system. Hope that answers the question and makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Matt, for clarifying further on that question there and for answering it very extensively. We really appreciate it. Is there any other questions from the participants? You can also unmute your mic and engage. I know, and a lot of people might just enjoy typing the questions in the chat box, but it'd also be nice to hear a voice, one or two voices from the participants. So I've unmuted everybody's mic. So I've enabled everybody's mic, so you can just unmute your mic and speak. Or if you want to make any contribution or share your experiences that you might have had as well in terms of your research project and how you budget it and all that, you can also share your experience, or if you have any other contributions as well. You can just unmute your mic and you can just give out your contribution or give us your question. Dr. Matt, so in that regard, I don't see any further questions.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, so it just shows how extensively or your presentation was explained, and we really appreciate that so much, and it shows that the participants here definitely have really taken a thing or two, from your presentation, and we really appreciate your insights. So in that regard, if there isn't any further questions, I just wanted to remind the participants that I have shared the feedback survey in the chat session. So please kindly fill in the feedback surveys. I've mentioned in the beginning that we also use it to generate certificate of attendance for you as participants. So ensure that you put your correct name, your surname, as well as your email address, and also as well to put in some, some kind words for our facilitator for their hard work as well, because they also use this. We send them this the attendance registers as well as the feedback survey for their reporting purposes as well. So in that regard, if there isn't any further questions, is there any final remarks that you'd like to leave us with, Dr. Matt, before we can end the session?
Sure. Yeah. I would like to just say when you as young scholars are wading yourself into research projects, good luck. It's scary. It's nerve-wracking, but it is also incredibly exciting, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with these things because many of your colleagues, many of your supervisors or people that you might look up to as senior colleagues have done these types of things before. So don't be afraid to engage with people that are on let's say along the road, further along in their academic journeys, to ask them about the practicalities of this stuff. The more you arm yourself with information, the more that you plan and start to anticipate how things will roll out in terms of a budget, the better off you're going to be. plan as much as you can down to the final cent, gaining experience, but also being informed, through talking to more senior colleagues who have done this kind of thing before, will take away a lot of those fears. And I think it is incredibly exhilarating, and it's a bit of a joy to be funded. This is what we all want. We want to feel like our research is appreciated and our ideas are worth exploring, and that's really, I think, what funding does. And the more preparation that you put into it, the better outcome it's going to be, from the research project to the budget to how the money is actually spent. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those full of thought and just to, the word to conclude this session. So in that regard, I would like to once again thank you so much, Dr. Matt, for the very insightful presentation on budgeting and financial management for
You're welcome. Thanks
research
for having me.
project. Nah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your insights, and appreciate all the participants for taking their time to join us. Hopefully, you have taken thing or two as well on what you can also incorporate into your research projects going forward. So in that regard, I will be now ending the session. So in that regard, thank you so much again to you, Dr. Matt, and thank you to the participants. I will be now ending the session, and enjoy the rest of your day further.
You too. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.